Welcome to Principles of Visual Design for Online Learning. In this brief lesson, we're going to discuss the principles that you can use to create visual materials for use in your own online courses. And so the ultimate goal here is to provide you and equip you with actual tools and principles that can be used to help your practice. We have several guiding challenge questions that we're going to use throughout to guide our learning in this lesson. First, we're going to look at something called the C.A.R.P model, and we're going to look and see what the C.A.R.P model is and how it can be used in our own practice. Next, we're going to look at how typography and color can influence the visual design of our courses and how just several very simple strategies can be used to improve the visual design in a very drastic way. And then finally, we're going to look at the various types of visual content that commonly show up in online courses and the things that you may or may not need to be aware of when you're dealing with those types of content. Now, one thing I want to point out is that while these principles can certainly be used to create visual messages, we must also be able to evaluate the visual messages for use in our own online courses. So this, in this case, would be pulling in materials from other websites or open resources and things like that. So knowing that, our focus here is to both create and to evaluate. And we need to be able to develop both of these competencies in order so we can use visual design effectively in this context. Now, the C.A.R.P model is something that is a great tool for any person involved in online learning to be able to have and to use. And the C.A.R.P model stands for contrast, alignment, repetition, and proximity. And these are four key design tools that are critical in order to develop the competencies that are needed for visual design in online learning. And so the contrast is looking at just basically showing what is important on the screen. The alignment would be how things are aligned and organized on the screen. Repetition would be repetition of varying color schemes, maybe font, maybe the position of elements in a lesson. So anything that has to do with repetition of styles or repetition of design approaches is what's included in that particular tool. And then finally, we'll look at how proximity can play a major role in understanding what's important or related information on a particular visual design piece. So in a lesson, for example, if I have an image and a description, how far I place that information apart from one another can have a major impact on how the learner perceives the importance of those two pieces of information to be. And so we're going to talk about how each of these things can be used to support visual design in online learning. I would encourage you to get to know this particular model and use it frequently. I know that I do in my own practice. So let's talk about the contrast part of the C.A.R.P model. So the contrast is showing what's important on the screen, basically. And in this example I have here is you can see an example on the left and an example on the right. So the first line on the left, there's a good amount of contrast in the blue background and the white font. Conversely, the contrast with the yellow background and the white font is much less, making it a much more difficult read for students being able to read that content. So being able to see if you can select a background color and a foreground color that work well together is very important in terms of being able to design effective visual materials. And so you can think about this in your own lessons if you have, for example, a PowerPoint slide that you're presenting and you have a black background and a very, very dark gray font. That can be very difficult for learners to read if that is the intent for them to read a large amount of content in that particular medium. Now this is an example that I want to share with you. This is a lesson that I created for use in one of the workshops that we do, and you can see here that student-centered learning has a very high contrast, and then I've also placed the applying student-centered learning principles to online courses as still with some contrast, but it's of less importance. And you can notice that I've used color there to emphasize the contrast that goes on here. Also, you can see that the font in the title is a bold, very large bold-faced font, and so that also lends more contrast to that particular information, and thus it shows what's important on that particular screen. And so you can think about this in not only the design of lesson materials like that, but also in how you may combine even messages to students through emails or things like that, and finding ways to accentuate the important information that students really need to know. So the second element of the C.A.R.P model is termed alignment. And alignment is a way for us to yield consistency to the design of our materials. So if those of you are like me, and you can see the items over on the left, and the bullets are not left aligned, and everything's kind of not consistent there, that bothers me quite a bit, and that bothers learners too. And it shows that there is just a lack of attention to detail in terms of how that material is presented to the learner. And so in contrast, if you were to look at alignment and making sure that the things are left aligned and that they can be presented to the learner, they're more easily read, it helps the overall visual design of the course. And I know that you can relate to this if you receive an attachment or document or something like that in the email and someone hasn't paid much attention to the alignment of various materials, whether it's a bulleted list or a variety of other elements that may be on the screen. So alignment is a key thing to remember. I want to share with you an example here. This is one of the best examples that I can find related to the good use of alignment. This is a screenshot from TurboTax, the tax preparation software. And one of the things that's important when people are using this software is that they are dealing with an infrequent taxes and very high risk activity, also taxes. And so it's important that they get visual design right in this particular case. And you can see that the use of alignment is very well done on this interface. And so you can see, for example, that wages and salaries, all the both using contrast as well, but go straight down to the left alignment of the page, as well as the icons. You can also notice over here on the right that it's easily to see where you're supposed to start that particular module of the tool through the use of the start buttons. Also, even the visit all is aligned, right aligned with the start buttons. And so this plays an important part in being able to make something usable and learnable for your learners. Now, the repetition element of the C.A.R.P model is also a key factor. And as you can see on the example on the left, it uses a consistent repetition. So I used 1, 2, 3, 4, list item, list item, list item, list item. It's all in the same font, it's all in the same color. It uses a great degree of repetition. Instead, on the right, I've presented an example where all the bullet points are of different style, the colors are different, and you can see that there is certainly a difference between the repetition being used in the left and a repetition being used on the right. And this also lends a lot of validity to the visual designs and making sure that people can see and be able to have a better perception of the visual materials that you are presenting to them. Now this is an example of repetition, and this is actually out of a lesson that I've designed, and you can see that there's several elements of repetition going on here. In the modules, I have the challenge, equip, practice, and apply sections. These are repeated through the various modules with the exception of the design studio and the orientation. So this develops a sense of flow for the students, and so they know what's coming next and what they can expect. You'll also notice on the visual materials that the use of color is consistent. So the use of the color and the font in this entire page is consistent, as well as the button styles and the headers that are used. And so everything here has a consistent look and feel while still providing a very nice visual and attractive look for the learners. So not only in this case is it appealing, it's also learnable for the learners to be able to use and to find the information that they need and really focus on the learning process instead of just trying to find the information in the learning management system. Now, the final element of the C.A.R.P model is called proximity. And proximity plays a very, very important role in the way that learners perceive information to be important or not important based on how close it is to one another. So in this particular case, I have an image and then I have a very brief description of what that image is. I would venture a guess that many of us have done this in a lesson before, where we would have an image and then we put a description of, of exactly what that image is to kind of annotate and describe that to the learner. So in this case, I'm presenting and said these is an image of local business people. It relates to that. So as I move this example, you can see I've kind of moved that description away from it, and it's not quite as related then as when we look at it. And I continue to move it, and they're very not related at all at this point. And then if I were to remove the shape behind it, which also plays an important role in determining proximity, if I were to remove that background, you can see that these two elements, for all intensive purposes, are not related at all on this particular visual field. And these are important considerations to think about. So we wouldn't, for example, if we were going to apply this to a lesson, we wouldn't put an image and then put the description 5 or 6 lines down the page. We have to think about how we present things together and think about the overall experience of the learner when we're presenting visual materials. Now, in this example, I'm bringing back the same example that I used for repetition, and you can see that for proximity, the information related to a particular topic is all in closer proximity than to the information related to a separate topic. And so you can see that I've used proximity as a key strategy in terms of organizing a hierarchy and making sure that learners can understand what's related versus what's not related to one another. Again, a very, very important part of visual design and the fourth element of the C.A.R.P model. Now, I want to talk very briefly about typography. Now, typography can be a lesson in and of itself, but I want to share with you just two main goals and perspectives on typography. Now, typography can set the tone of a lesson, it can influence the readability and legibility of content, and it can also enhance or eliminate the effectiveness of visual information. So, through typography, you have the ability to really make things good, or you have the ability to really make things bad. So I want to share with you some key strategies related to using typography in e-learning lessons. First, I would encourage you to use sans serif fonts for online materials. An example of a sans serif font would be this top example here. Now, and then you would use serif fonts for print materials, or things like Times New Roman would be an example of a serif font for print materials. You would also want to be sure that you use the fonts consistently, and you want to be sure to design for the readability online. So for example, use headings that are legible and use an appropriate font size so people can read it. You also want to consider about segmenting text to enhance the readability. So for example, you want to make sure that you don't want to have a large amount of text on one screen, but instead chunk it and segment it out so that it's a more readable for the learner. And then finally, be sure to use the common web standards for font formatting. So if you're going to present a hyperlink where someone needs to select and click, make sure that that is underlined and it's in a different color, such as blue, rather than having it just as the same amount of font. This indicates some things for the learner to be aware of. Now, in the online module, I've posted some additional reading and link about using typefaces, but you will want to see and make sure that the use of typography is an important element. We have to consider that in our use of e-learning lessons. So I'd encourage you to check out some more of those examples and additional readings on typography in the online course site. Now I want to talk a little bit about color, and color is just as important to typography, but it also can set the tone of a lesson, but it also has a lot of meaning behind the use of colors. Now, colors can match with a tone that you want to achieve, but you also have to consider maybe cultural differences that are involved with color. And so I've also have some additional reading in the online course site related to the meaning of color and how that influences the way that we select and use color in our lessons. So when applying color principles to online learning, you want to consider not only the affective impact of color, or how it makes us feel, but also the learning impact of the selecting, integrating, and organizing that information into the learner's long-term memory. So is it easy to see what's on the screen, or is it difficult to select that information, and consequently what does that mean for the learning standpoint? And so some design strategies that you'll want to use when dealing with color is you want to design for consistency. You want to select a consistent color palette, and I'm going to show you an example of some tools that are available there. And that you also want to consider the meaning of the colors selected. So if you're selecting red in the American culture, that might mean very important or angry, but in other ways it may be a very vibrant and celebratory color. So in terms of examples, you can think about the use of color in fast food restaurants. Many of them are red or yellows, and that tends to denote like an idea of hunger. So we want to buy or something like that. Whereas you'll look at a lot of banks' websites and you'll see things such as blues and greens. This denotes tranquility and stability. And so that you can see that all these things have meanings, and we have to consider that when we're designing for online learning lessons. Now I mentioned a tool that you can use for color. I would recommend this tool called Kuler, or KULER.com, and this is put out by Adobe, and it's such a great tool for selecting different color palettes. And if you would select in there, you can actually choose the colors that you want, as well as you can get the codes that can be used in tools like PowerPoint and things of that nature. So selecting color and using consistent color palettes are a key element to be able to consider and use in visual design materials. Now I want to devote a little bit of time to the various types of visual content that you're going to see, and how these kind of principles play into what happens in online learning context from a design standpoint. And from my perspective, I really see that there are three different categories of visual materials in online courses. First is the photographic, so when someone's actually taking a picture. The second is graphical, so these would be computer-generated graphics that are generally used to show concepts. And then analytical, and these are anytime that you bring in certain types of data and you want to show relationships related to those to that data. And each of these types of visuals is best used in certain situations, and they all have unique factors to consider when you're trying to choose whether to use them or not. So photographic visuals are excellent for showing a real person, place, or thing, where accuracy of the environment is important. So these can be both static or still photography, or dynamic, such as a video. So photographic visuals can evoke a lot of emotional response. And so, for example, in the picture that's shown there, you can see it's a beautiful, beautiful place, and there's a sort of emotional response that comes out of that. And then the graphical type of visuals are a great way to show concepts, processes, or relationships. And again, these can be both static, such as an organizational chart, or dynamic, such as an animation. And so these also play an important role in the learning process, where maybe we don't need to show an accurate, realistic representation, such as a photograph, but we need to show a process. And then finally, the analytical visuals are used specifically to show data. So examples of analytical visuals should be a bar graph, or a data table, or even a line graph, such as like a stock report. And again, these can be both static, such as a column chart in a company's annual report, or dynamic, such as a data dashboard, such as the TurboTax or Google Analytics service, for example. Now, in the online course site, I've posted a resource for you, and these are some heuristics that I designed. And heuristics are varying principles that you can use to evaluate and critique both your own visual designs and visual designs of others. And so this can be helpful to organize key considerations for designing visual materials, and this checklist will assist you with both creating and evaluating those materials specifically for online learning contexts. But I want you to remember something, that visual design is not just about making something look good, it's about solving a problem. And in the case of online learning, we must design and select designs based on enhancing learning outcomes. And I've developed these heuristics specifically designed to help you make those decisions, and to walk through some key considerations for designing online learning materials through the use of these principles. So in summary for this lesson, we looked at the C.A.R.P model and how that can be used. We also looked at the use of typography and color and what important roles that plays in the learning process. And then finally, we looked at the different types of visual content that you should be aware of, and specifically what context that you would want to use for that particular those visual elements. And so in order to guide kind of our future learning, we want to really explore how visual design principles are applied to the many contexts in which we use online learning resources. So we can think about that these can be from lesson materials, that's an easy connection, to videos, to open source resources, and I would consider from a very practical standpoint, even a syllabus. If we can use visual design principles to enhance how we present our syllabus, that helps our students get off to a great start and helps them reference the information that's important to them throughout the course. And so that you can see how the use of visual design principles play a key role in all aspects of online learning. And so in kind of summary, we were able to use and discuss several of these principles for use in our online learning context. Now in our next module, we're really going to focus on the way of creating visual materials and strategies you can actually use to integrate not only the elements from the first lesson in terms of the overall impact of visual design in online learning. We'll use the principles that we developed in this module, and then in the next module we'll actually begin creating the visual materials for use in our own online courses. So I look forward to seeing you and working with you in that module as well.